People who have friend with benefits, what's your story? Welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Story 1. We were at her place, just hanging out and talking about Halloween. The conversation started off casually, but then we got onto the topic of how people use the holiday as an excuse to dress provocatively. The exchange went something like this. Honestly, it's just an excuse for people to dress slutty and hook up. I said, well, sex is good though. There was a brief pause as we both kind of laughed it off, but the vibe shifted. We had that moment where everything felt a little charged, and the next thing we knew, we were in bed together and one thing led to another. It was spontaneous and easy, just like the conversation we had. Story 2. We were watching a movie together, and there was some reference to boob J. He said he'd never tried that before, because all the girls he dated before had smaller boobs. Mine are very conducive to such activities. I jokingly asked if he wanted to try with me. He jokingly said yes. So we tried. Story 3. We started off as good friends, and over time, our friendship naturally evolved into us becoming roommates. Both of us had been out of relationship for a while, and as we spent more time together, we started noticing the growing tension between us. It wasn't something either of us had planned, but living together definitely intensified it. Eventually, we ended up sleeping together a few times, and it was fun and uncomplicated. After a while, she started seeing someone, and we both realized that it was time to move on from that chapter. We agreed to end things before they could complicate our friendship, and there were no hard feelings. We're still great friends today, and it didn't ruin the bond we shared. Looking back, it was just casual sex between two consenting adults who both knew where we stood. Nothing more, nothing less. It didn't change the foundation of our friendship, and we both moved on without any drama. Story 4. We weren't super close, more like we had a mutual friend, and that's how we ended up connecting. I knew for years that he was interested in being more than friends, but he was always very upfront about it while also respecting my boundaries. I didn't really act on it at the time. A few years later, after I got out of a relationship and was missing physical intimacy, he happened to be in town. I reached out to him, we met up the next day, and did it. We ended up shagging on and off for a couple of years. Looking back, my only regret is not connecting with him sooner. Honestly, he was incredible, like he had had some sort of masterclass in shagging. Story 5. A few years ago, I had a friend I met in college. Even though we lived in different states, we kept in touch and would talk weekly. During spring break, when we were both home, he casually mentioned that he'd recently lost his virginity, but had been told he wasn't very good at it. I jokingly said, well, in that case, we should practice and make you better. We ended up talking more about it and decided we could just be friends with benefits. We spent the summer practicing, and when fall came and he went back to school, that was the end of it. We don't really bring it up anymore, but I do like to think that his girlfriend now thinks he's great in bed, and maybe I played a small role in helping him get there. Story 6. I've had a friends with benefits situation for about 3 years now with Brad. He's actually the brother of my best friend, Kate, and we've known each other really well since high school and college. After I got out of a really bad relationship, I was in that phase where all I wanted to do was cry and eat ice cream. During that time, Kate invited me to a house party, and that's where things took an unexpected turn. After the party, Brad and I ended up hooking up. It was a little awkward at first, but after a bit of time, we started hanging out again and realized we had a unique dynamic. We could be friends who just happened to occasionally mess around when we were both single. It's been a fun, low-pressure arrangement, and we've kept things light and uncomplicated over the years. Story 7. I had known her for years, and during that time, I was in a relationship with her best friend. When my relationship with my ex ended, I stayed close with her, and we continued hanging out regularly. We always had a great time together, just two friends catching up and having fun. One night, after a few drinks and some honest conversation, she casually said we should still be just friends, but friends who have sex sometimes. At first, I thought it was a joke, but the more we talked, the more the idea seemed to make sense. We had great chemistry, and there was no pressure for anything more serious. We decided to give it a try, and what started as a casual arrangement ended up lasting for years, with us reconnecting every now and then when the timing felt right. It wasn't always consistent, but whenever we were in the same place emotionally, we would spend time together. There were no expectations beyond that, just two friends who enjoyed each other's company and physical connection. Over time, things naturally shifted, and she eventually got married. While the physical aspect of our relationship ended, we remained good friends throughout all the changes in our lives. Even now, though she's married and living her life, we still stay in touch, and that bond we've had all these years remains strong. We've both moved on, but there's still a special connection that I'm grateful for. Story 8. We were casual friends, having met through a mutual connection. We had been texting and getting to know each other over the course of a few weeks, keeping things light and friendly. One night, I jokingly told her I could show her how to make carbonara, and she seemed intrigued. So, I showed up with 2 bottles of wine, and we cooked together. We spent the evening laughing, watching some stand-up comedy, and enjoying each other's company. Eventually, the night took a more intimate turn, and we ended up sleeping together. From then on, our connection was on and off. We both dated other people, but there were always those moments when we would reconnect and hook up. It wasn't complicated, we just enjoyed each other's company when the timing was right, and it was great. Story 9. I've had 4 experiences on separate occasions. The first one was a girl I met during my first year of college. We were hanging out at a party, and as the night wound down, everyone else left, and it was just the 2 of us talking. Eventually, we ended up jumping into the lagoon near her place and started making out. There wasn't much more than that, but before I left, she told me she was only looking for something casual. We kept it up for about 3 to 4 months until she got a boyfriend, and after I dropped out of college, we lost touch. The second one was with another girl I met in a college class. It played out similarly to the first situation, just in a different setting. We hooked up for about a month, but she ended up going back to her ex, and I dropped out. We still hang out occasionally, but nothing has happened since. The third one was with a girl I've known since high school. I'm graduating this year, just to give some context. It started with some drunken makeouts at parties, and things escalated when she invited me over for a private party, canceling on the rest of the group, so it'd be just the 2 of us. We hooked up, and that lasted for about a month. It ended because we both started developing feelings for each other, but she didn't want a relationship and was also moving away to finish her degree. The fourth one, and currently the longest, is with a girl I met at a club. We hooked up after the night out, and since then, we've kept things casual. She gave me her number, and now we mostly text each other when we want to meet up for fun. It's been enjoyable, and it works for both of us. Story 10. I was in a friend with benefits arrangement for 5 years, and it was great. The sex was amazing, always there when we both wanted it, and we seemed to be on the same page every time. I've never been with someone so sexually compatible. We'd sometimes do dinner, wine, movies, or just hang out. No pressure, no strings attached. I could leave whenever, and there was never any drama. But looking back, I can't help but wonder if I wasted those 5 years with someone I knew I'd never settle down with. Maybe the love of my life passed me by during that time? Who knows? But one thing's for sure, it was a lot of fun while it lasted. Story 11. When I started college, I quickly became close with a large group of friends. One guy and I hit it off right away, and we spent a lot of time together, both with the group and one-on-one. At first, we were just friends, but over time, things started to get physical. Eventually, we all decided to move in together. There were 4 of us, including him. Around that time, we started to stop being intimate, and I began to realize that he had some serious issues. As time passed, the rest of our friends distanced themselves from him, and they had no idea we had been sleeping together for over a year. The final straw came when his mom called me after he'd gotten food poisoning. She had made a plan with him on how I was going to shut McDonald's down for allegedly poisoning him. That's when I realized I needed to cut ties completely. I stopped having sex with him after that. Story 12. Almost 5 years ago, one of the guys in our friend group tragically passed away in a traffic accident. We attended his funeral together, and afterwards, I drove her home. Neither of us wanted to be alone, so I ended up staying at her place. We started with a couple of glasses of wine, then had a few more, and before I knew it, I woke up in her bed. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but we just went on with our day like nothing changed. A couple of days later, when we met up again, there was an undeniable tension between us. At the end of the night, when the group split up, I offered to drive her home. In the car, we talked about what had happened the week before and the lingering tension. Rather than diving into the why, the conversation quickly turned to the sex itself. As it turned out, we both really enjoyed it. That's when we decided to talk about it more seriously and agreed to try being friends with benefits. It worked out surprisingly well, and we've been hooking up regularly ever since. Story 13. After college, I had a casual arrangement with a girl I met while we were both in professional school. Our schedules were crazy. We didn't have time for traditional dates or meaningful relationships. Most of our days were packed with classes, followed by gym sessions or sports where we first crossed paths, and then we'd head home to study. Weekends were spent catching up on life, groceries, cleaning, errands, and of course, more studying. We started studying together, mainly to bounce ideas off each other, and we'd alternate between each other's apartments. One day, as we were studying, we started chatting about something else, and things just naturally escalated. Afterward, We talked about how a full-blown relationship would be too much given our schedules, but we both agreed we were still interested in staying physically connected. So, we came up with our own little routine. Whenever we wanted to hook up, one of us would text, "Want to study at my place tonight?" This arrangement worked for almost 2 years, until school started easing up and we both eventually entered serious relationships with other people. Story 14. We had a casual arrangement that worked whenever we were both single, and when one of us was in a relationship, we'd simply keep it as a friendship. It was easygoing, and we remained close without any complications. But when I got engaged, things took an unexpected turn. She believed we were both just dating until we'd eventually get serious with each other. At a friend's wedding, she confronted me about it, and unfortunately, it happened in front of my fiancé. I realized I had to end the friendship, but I genuinely hadn't seen any of it coming. Story 15. It kind of developed gradually, I guess. We started out as acquaintances in high school, but after graduation, we became closer friends. She was very open about her sexuality, which made me feel comfortable enough to share mine with her as well. At the time, she had a boyfriend, and they were together for quite a while, but eventually they broke up. After spending a lot of time talking about sex, it felt like a natural progression to take things to the next level once there were no other commitments in the way. It wasn't a regular thing, but when it did happen, it was great. We always made sure to stay just friends outside the bedroom, and I think that arrangement worked best for both of us. Over time, we both ended up in our own separate relationships. But who knows? If we ever find ourselves single and in the same place again, I wouldn't be opposed to revisiting the old dynamic. Story 16. A few times I've had casual relationships. One developed into a 2-year relationship that ended on friendly terms. The second one started off differently. We first met for a date, and after 3 dates, we agreed to take things slowly. On the evening of our third date, she went out and met someone else, and we realized then that we might be better off not dating. We left it at that, but about 6 months later, she reached out, and after talking, we both agreed to be friends with benefits. We established some clear boundaries. If feelings ever came up, we'd let each other know and end things. We'd also check in monthly to make sure we were both still happy with the arrangement. Lastly, if either of us went on a date with someone else, we'd be upfront about it. And if the date went well, we'd end our arrangement. Everything went smoothly until about 6 months in when someone asked me on a date. After a nice evening with them and feeling a real connection, I told my friend with benefits, and we agreed it was time to move on. The next day, however, I was unexpectedly met with a lot of backlashes. I received messages from her friends and family, whom I'd never met, and even some mutual friends, accusing me of wasting her time. Story 17. Girl 1. We had an on-again, off-again friendship. We'd hang out, things would get complicated, and we'd take a break. After a while, we both realized that despite everything, we were better off as friends. We stayed in touch, and everything eventually settled down. Girl 2. She was dating one of my close friends, and I was someone they both trusted. Over time, she developed feelings for me, and my friend found out. We agreed to stop, and after they broke up, we reconnected. Things got tricky when I started spending time with someone else, and she ended up telling my friend what had happened. After some tension, we all made amends. A few years later, she reached out on my wedding day, which definitely added some awkwardness. Girl 3. She was a high school friend of Girl 2's. We had a lot of fun together, but things got complicated when I went home with someone else during a night out. She wanted a relationship, and I agreed. We ended up dating for a bit, but it wasn't meant to last. It was a good learning experience for both of us. Girl 4. We were close friends for a while, but she moved far away. She came to visit, and at the time, I was seeing someone else. Things didn't go as planned, and the experience was a bit awkward. Despite that, we stayed friends, and things are back to normal between us now. Girl 5. I met her at a club where people explored alternative lifestyles. We spent some time together, but things were a bit difficult because she was new to being with a man. We eventually decided to give dating a try, but things didn't work out. Later, my best friend confessed she had feelings for me, and we ended things. Now, I'm happily married to my best friend, which feels like a perfect full circle. Story 18. I had a 2-year arrangement like that with a close friend. We'd always been super close, but there were never romantic feelings between us. After we both went through breakups around the same time, we shared a lighthearted, should we, moment and decided to give it a try. Those 2 years were filled with amazing, guilt-free connection. It eventually ended when she started seeing someone new, and while it was bittersweet, there were no hard feelings. Story 19. I had a great friends with benefits relationship with someone I reconnected with years after we'd both moved on from the same school. One day, I got a friend request from her, and it turned out we worked close to each other. We started meeting up for lunch, and before long, things became more than just friendly lunches, and we started seeing each other regularly. This went on for several months, maybe even longer. Eventually, she developed deeper feelings and told me, very honestly, that she couldn't continue. I felt bad because I thought we both understood our arrangement, but she wanted more, and it was hard for her to continue knowing it wouldn't become that. Looking back, she handled it in the best possible way, and although we don't see each other anymore, we're still connected on social media. A few years later, we randomly bumped into each other at a concert. We were each with our respective partners, and the four of us chatted. My girlfriend didn't know her, but she somehow picked up on our past immediately, even though the conversation was friendly and not flirty at all. Story 20. It felt exciting, but also like hanging out with a close friend. He was incredibly attractive, super fun to be around, and had so many qualities I loved: gamer, geek, and hilarious. I was just looking for a good time, and he was all in. After a few weeks, I needed to move, and he offered for me to stay with him while I looked for an apartment. Then the pandemic hit. We've been together ever since. I call it love. He jokingly calls it Stockholm Syndrome. I went looking for silver and ended up with gold. Story 21. Back in college, we started out with no strings attached, just a lighthearted, no-commitment arrangement. We were both focused on school and having fun, so it seemed perfect, just two friends who enjoyed each other's company with no expectations. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. We found ourselves spending more time together outside of the friends with benefits arrangement, going out, laughing, sharing our lives, and discovering that we really clicked. What was supposed to be simple turned into something meaningful without us even realizing it. Eventually, we stopped kidding ourselves. It was more than just fun. We genuinely cared about each other, and it became clear we were building a real foundation together. Fast forward to today, and here we are celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary with 4 amazing kids. It turns out that missing the just friends with benefits memo was the best thing that could have happened to us. We started with something casual and ended up with a family and a love we wouldn't trade for the world. Story 22. It was a memorable experience. She was a stunning redhead, a few years older than me, and we met through a mutual friend. For the first few years, our relationship was strictly platonic, but there was always an undeniable attraction between us. One weekend, a group of about a dozen of us went camping and water skiing. We'd been drinking, and as the night wound down, she crawled into my tent. She made it clear right away that, due to her job, she traveled a lot for a phone company, she wasn't looking for anything serious. However, she mentioned that she sometimes needed physical attention and was open to that. For the next 3 years, we continued this casual arrangement with no expectations. Eventually, she got a promotion that moved her to the East Coast, and I met my future wife. She in turn settled down with a guy who owned a furniture business. Over the years, we stayed in touch, remaining good friends. Neither of us had kids. Sadly, she passed away about 5 years ago due to complications from MS. Even though it ended, I'll always remember her fondly, and I'm grateful for the friendship we shared. Story 23. I've had a few experiences in the past, and most of them were with men. I'm 25. In each of those situations, I ended up catching feelings, but unfortunately, the other person didn't feel the same way. It was always a bit frustrating because I'd be invested emotionally while they kept things casual. It wasn't that they were bad experiences, but they definitely taught me a lot about managing expectations and recognizing when something might be one-sided. However, my most recent experience was different. This time it was with a woman, and things felt different from the start. We started off casually, but over time, it developed into something deeper. We grew closer, and I realized that I was building a connection that felt more meaningful. Now we're in a relationship, and it's been a beautiful and fulfilling experience so far. It's shown me that sometimes it's less about gender and more about the connection you share with someone. So I guess it really depends on the person and how you both vibe together. Story 24. Most of my past relationships followed a similar pattern. I was upfront from the beginning, making it clear that I wasn't looking for anything serious, just a friend to spend time with. I've been married for 15 years now, but before that, I was still on good terms with almost everyone I had been involved with. There were a few people who developed feelings, but I always communicated honestly and never intentionally led anyone on. In my experience, not everyone can navigate this kind of arrangement, as many people tend to associate physical intimacy with love. There was one particular instance where I was seeing two people at once, an older woman around 45 and a guy 22. Eventually, I ended up dating the guy, but the woman got upset when I decided to be exclusive with him. She began telling people that I had used her, which made the situation a bit uncomfortable. Since everyone knew the arrangement, it didn't really affect me, but it was awkward for a while. I think she may have thought there was potential for a more complicated dynamic between the three of us, but I had always been clear that it wasn't the case. She acted as though she understood, but when the truth came out, I had no choice but to cut ties. My boyfriend and I ended up dating for quite some time after that, before I eventually met my wife. Story 25. At the time, it was amazing. I had a small circle of friends, her a buddy who I think had a crush on her, and another guy who had a thing for me, though I was completely oblivious to it. We were all really close and worked together for a while. As things went on, she and I started getting closer, but I didn't say anything because she was a gorgeous, confident Mexican woman, and honestly, I was just along for the ride. About 3 months in, my buddy pulled me aside and asked if I was with her. I told him no, and suggested he go for it if he was interested, since I only saw her as a friend. I thought that was the understanding between us. But then she told the other friend, the one who liked me, that we'd been seeing each other intimately and that she had feelings for me. And just like that, everything unraveled. I lost all my close friends in the process. It felt like everything fell apart in a moment. Story 26. I started spending time with the projectionist when I worked at a theater. He was 31 and I was 20, and we developed a connection that was both hot and enjoyable. At first, we only hung out once or twice a week, exclusively at night, but eventually it became more frequent, about 3 or 4 times a week. This continued for around a year and a half. Before he moved to Colorado, he admitted that he had developed feelings for me, which resonated with my own feelings towards him. When he moved, we kept in touch every day through messages and had weekly calls. Over time, we became very close, and I considered him one of my best friends. We had spent a lot of time together, and we got to know each other well during our time together. He was no longer just someone I had spent time with casually. He had become someone I cared deeply about. I supported his decision to move to Colorado because I wanted him to pursue what he felt was best for him. However, things weren't easy for him there, and he confessed that he wanted a relationship with me. He suggested we get an apartment together to see how we might fare as a couple. At that point, I wasn't sure if I was in love with him, but I knew I cared for him a lot. I eventually moved to Colorado to figure things out. Living together felt natural, and we enjoyed doing things as a couple. He told me he loved me first, and when I said it back, I meant it. We've been together for almost 3 years now, and I'm turning 21 next month. I love him more every day, and while I don't know what the future holds, I'm genuinely happy with where we are right now. Story 27. I didn't know her at all before we got together. After my high school girlfriend of 2.5 years left for a summer job and broke up with me when I went to visit, a girl my ex met there, who happened to be from our area, set me up with her friend for the sole purpose of shagging. When she started developing feelings, I realized it wasn't what I was looking for at the time, so we parted ways. I then entered a 7-year relationship with someone else and didn't keep in touch with the friend with benefits. Now that I'm out of that long relationship, I reconnected with her. To my surprise, we found that we have a lot more in common than I ever expected. What started as something casual has turned into something deeper, and now we're kind of dating. It's funny how life works sometimes. Story 28. At first, I was ecstatic. It was the best sex I'd ever had. But then, the way she started looking at me made me realize she was falling for me, and that threw me off. I had just gotten out of a 4-year relationship about a year and a half before, so I wasn't looking for anything serious. I ended up breaking her heart, kind of ended things, but we still had a few more encounters after that. I ended up not talking to her for about 3 years. Fast forward to today, and she's my fiancée, and we have a beautiful 7-month-old daughter. Life took an unexpected turn, but it worked out in the end. Story 29. Keeping in mind that I'm a gay man, and they were as well, it was a good experience. It wasn't always about sex. The conversations were often fun and engaging. I got to meet people from all different walks of life, which was interesting and eye-opening. When I met my husband, fell in love, and we moved in together, that part of my life ended. Not because I was suddenly forbidden from doing it, but because I didn't want to be sexually intimate with anyone else. Later, he told me that after hearing the 6th version of "Oh, you're the guy who got Jen Shed to settle down," he started to suspect I was a bit more adventurous than I initially seemed. Story 30. I've had a few over the years. The ones from my younger adulthood are still very close friends of mine. After my divorce, things got more complicated. Many of the relationships came with a lot of emotional baggage, and it became harder to maintain friendships afterward. Even when they were the ones who wanted a relationship, it was difficult to understand when it was really over, which made it harder to stay friends. The last person I was with, though, I'm now in a committed relationship with. As a side note, I've had true friends with benefit situations. There were no family introductions, and I didn't want to be involved in their personal lives unless it directly affected me, which was very rare. We talked like friends, treated each other like friends, and I fully expected them to continue dating others, as I wasn't ready for a relationship at the time and couldn't offer the emotional support a relationship would need. Story 31. We met online several years ago when we were both still pretty young. We spent a lot of time talking, but we lived far apart. A couple of years later, we finally met in person and shared our first kiss. The next month, I visited her, and things progressed between us. I took her virginity, and that moment was incredibly important to me, probably even more significant than my own first time, and I remember the exact date. I started visiting her once a month, but she had strict parents, so she would ask to sleep at her best friend's house, and I would stay with her there. Her best friend's parents were incredibly kind to me, and I will always be grateful for that. We grew up together during that time, starting when we were 17 and 20, and it lasted about 3 to 4 years. We talked every day, but we both knew we couldn't be together the way we wanted. We tried hard not to label it as a traditional relationship. It wasn't exactly a friends with benefit situation, though, because we felt much more than that. We were best friends when we weren't together and like a couple when we were. We even talked about our future, like having kids, and even decided on a wedding date. 10 years later in 2020, a date we both agreed on. We knew we had to hold off on fully committing, but we cherished what we had, and our connection was deep. At the beginning, I visited her once a month, but as time passed, it became harder to see each other because of financial struggles, and the distance started to hurt more. One day, it happened, what we both feared but knew might eventually come. She met someone else. They started dating, and she was open with me about it. She told me that she needed to explore this new relationship, and I understood. I wanted her to be happy, and if he could give her what I couldn't at that time, then I was okay with it. We continued to talk, but after a couple of months, she told me that her new relationship wasn't working because of the connection we still shared. She said we needed to stop talking for a while, but that while turned into silence. After just a few messages, we stopped communicating. I sent her a long message on her birthday, letting her know I was still there for her, even if we weren't in touch. But when I reached out on her next birthday, I found out she had changed her number and blocked me on social media. It hurt more than anything I'd ever felt before. I still think about her all the time, and I often wonder how she's doing, what she's up to, and if she needs someone to talk to. But I respect her decision, and if she's happy with him, I want nothing more than for her to be happy. It's hard to not be a part of her life anymore, but I've come to accept it. She was the first, and still the only woman I've ever loved. I'll never forget her, and I'll always care about her, even if we're no longer in contact. Story 32. We're not together anymore, but we did have an interesting connection for a while. I was hanging out with my friend and another guy when things got a little playful. At one point, my friend used me to demonstrate something, which involved a specific touch, gripping the back of my neck. According to him, my reaction was a mix of surprise and unexpected attraction, which looking back was probably true. He became curious about helping me explore different things I might not have realized I liked. At the time, I wasn't looking for anything serious, and he was polyamorous, so we kept things light and never got too close. Eventually, life changed when I moved on to a different school, and we lost touch. But while it lasted, it was an enjoyable experience. Story 33. One of the challenges with friends with benefits relationships is how things change once the arrangement ends. Being intimate with a good friend can alter the dynamic, and often, the friendship doesn't last in the same way. It's something you have to accept and move on from. As for the situation, we met during the first summer when Pokemon Go was super popular. We were out playing, and as the evening got colder, I put my arm around her. That led us back to her place, where things heated up pretty quickly. Honestly, it was an unforgettable experience. Our connection lasted a few months, and it was fun, mainly because we would hang out, talk about life, or go on nature walks, but also share a carefree physical connection. It was exciting at the time. We even found ourselves sneaking off for a spontaneous encounter in the woods one day, which was a unique thrill I'll never forget. However, as time went on, I started realizing that outside of the fun moments, our interests didn't align. She spent a lot of time smoking weed, and I found it difficult to connect with her in meaningful ways beyond the physical side of things. It was hard to imagine a long-term friendship, so I made the decision to end things. While she was a great person, it became clear that we were better off as friends, not something more. It was a tough decision, but it turned out to be for the best in the end. Story 34. It all started back when I was in my late teens. One night, I was walking a close female friend home after a party. We'd known each other since we were kids and were really close, but we'd always just been friends. At the time, we were both feeling a little down. We were among the few single people in our group, and after spending the evening surrounded by couples, we were both in a bit of a silly, light-hearted mood. When we got to her door, she jokingly said, "Well, we could just start dating. Want to come in and hang out?" I laughed and responded, "Well, you're not that bad looking, so sure. Why not?" We both chuckled at the idea, but then something shifted. She looked at me a little differently, and in a quieter voice, she asked, "So, do you actually want to come in?" I was still a bit tipsy, but sober enough to think about it. I asked her if she was serious, and after a moment, she nodded. So, we went inside, and we spent the rest of the night together. It was fantastic. The next morning was a little awkward, waking up next to each other. We talked it through, and both agreed that while we valued our friendship, we didn't want to complicate things with a relationship. We chalked it up to the circumstances of the night, and decided it was a one-time thing. However, what started as a one-time thing turned into a unique, ongoing connection. We were both on the same page, and it ended up being one of the healthiest relationships I've had. We kept things respectfully and understood that things might change, especially as we moved on to different chapters in our lives after college. But it worked out well while it lasted. Thank you for watching. What is your friend with benefits story? Let us know in the comment below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.